Thanks for joining us for CBN Newswatch. I'm Wendy Griffith. Today, President-elect Donald Trump once again warning Hamas, set the hostages free by the time I take office, or, quote, all hell will break out in the Middle East and it will not be good for Hamas. We'll hear about the latest efforts to get the hostages released, including the Americans still being held. Major wildfires in the Los Angeles area forcing tens of thousands of people to evacuate. We'll bring you a look at the devastation in California. And a surprising announcement from Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg is getting a cautious thumbs up from many conservatives, as some say it could be a win for free speech. And remembering former President Jimmy Carter, our interview with Christian recording artist and filmmaker Andrew Greer about Carter's Christian faith and more. These stories and more today on NewsWatch.
This is CBN Newswatch.
And we begin with Israel's war against Hamas as President-elect Donald Trump once again issued another strong warning to the terrorist group to free the hostages in Gaza. As hostage negotiations continue in Qatar, Mr. Trump's envoy says the pressure is making an impact. CBN News Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl brings us this story from Jerusalem.
President-elect Donald Trump is repeating his warning to Hamas if the terror group doesn't free all the hostages.
If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East. And it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone. All hell will break out.
Trump's Middle East envoy says those threats have given new urgency to negotiations over a hostage deal.
What he said he expects, the red lines he's put out there, that's driving this negotiation.
Trump expressing anger over Hamas's treatment of the hostages.
Beautiful girl where they threw her in the car, pulled her by her ponytail and threw her in the car like she was a sack of potatoes. I said, what happened to her? Sir, she's dead. Like a 19, 20-year-old beautiful girl. They should have never taken her. They should have never been the attack of October 7th.
Witkoff is returning to Doha later this week to keep pushing the process forward.
But I think that we've had some really great progress, and I'm really hopeful that by the inaugural, we'll have some good things to announce.
As the negotiations ramp up, Israeli President Herzog met with an international task force that includes the U.S. to explore new avenues to free the hostages. Israel is taking part and says the only holdup is unreasonable demands by Hamas.
There is a major scar in our nation. If there is a major scar in the face of the earth, is the issue of the hostages. We want them back home as soon as possible. It's a huge task.
Hamas is the only reason and the only obstacle to the release of hostages, including children, babies, men, women.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Julie. Our CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell is here with us now with more. Great to have you in the studio
today,
Chris.
Great to be with you, Wendy. Yeah.
Well, Trump has issued this warning to Hamas several times now.
Right.
How seriously, Chris, do you think Hamas is taking this threat?
Well, I think they are taking it seriously. I think the other people that are taking it serious would be the mediators, and that would include Egypt and especially Qatar, because Qatar has really been the sponsor of Hamas. They've spent billions of dollars actually building what some call the largest terror base in the world, which is has been the Gaza Strip. So if he puts pressure on Qatar, that really could be a game changer, and I think put the pressure on Hamas, because they're really the chief sponsor of this terrorist group.
And there are still Americans being held by Hamas. What kind of action could President Trump take once he's back in office to get these Americans freed?
Well, some people have speculated he could actually send U.S. special forces into Gaza, along with the IDF, to help find as many as they can. It's so difficult right now because when you're inside Gaza, and we were there several months ago, there's a labyrinth of tunnels throughout the whole area there, maybe 400 miles, bigger than the London subway. So it's very difficult to find these people, and many of these tunnels have not yet been destroyed by the IDF. So that's one thing he could do. Special forces that could go in along with the IDF to do what they can.
Yeah, and we just pray that they're still alive.
Yeah.
It's been way over a year now. Well, how much cooperation is there between the Israeli government and the incoming Trump administration on getting the hostages
I
free?
think there's a lot of cooperation going on right now. You saw the mediator there along with Trump, and he's meeting with some of these negotiators in Doha, and I think it's a lot of cooperation, I would think. And I would add one thing about the anguish that's going on right now, Wendy, inside Israel. Israel's more like a family.
Yeah.
And when they see all these family members that have been hostages now about 460 days, it's just the mental and physical anguish is really pretty awful.
Man, I can only imagine, and you're there all the time. Well, what's the thinking in Israel, Chris, about how the Trump team and the Israeli government will deal with terrorism after Gaza, after the war is finally wrapped up?
Well, I think they're going to be on the same page. Unlike the Biden administration, which really almost had a schizophrenic relationship with Israel, they would give them munitions, but they also had a limited arms embargo. On the other hand, they wanted to undermine the Netanyahu government. So I think they're going to be much more on the same page when the Trump administration gets in, especially against terrorism. Trump likes to say that he defeated ISIS. Now, ISIS is actually reconstituting itself in parts of Syria. So I think Israel and the U.S. will be very much cooperating like they haven't in the past 4 years.
Chris, a report from the UN Watch, UN Watch says officials from the United Nations Relief and Works Agency often meet with Hamas and Islamic Jihad leaders. What will the Trump team do about UNRWA?
I think they may just defund UNRWA. I think that's what they did in 2016 when they got into office. UNRWA has been a sort of a fountainhead of terrorism training for new generations of Palestinians. And even people knew that before the Gaza war. But the Gaza war just exposed exactly how much cooperation there had been between Hamas and UNRWA. And many people say UNRWA is Hamas and Hamas is UNRWA. There's so much connection between the two. So many Hamas leaders that are part of UNRWA. So all that goes, I think, the Trump administration is going to come in and start defunding not only UNRWA, but other UN organizations that they had before. And I would add, Wendy, I think this whole idea about the hostages, there's really a history behind this. If you go back to the Barbary pirates in the 1790s, that's when actually Barbary pirates, Muslims, they got 11 American ships. That was kind of the birth of the U.S. Navy back in 1794. So there's a history behind this. We were there together in 2006 on the Second Lebanon War. Yeah. That's when there was an ambush against some IDF soldiers. They captured 2 there. Later in 2011, there was an exchange of prisoners. 1,027 prisoners for 1 Israeli soldier. What Hamas knew on October 7th is that they knew the hostages would be a sort of a game changer for them and a way to leverage. And one of the main things that has prevented the hostages from being released is that Hamas wants them to really make sure that the IDF leaves Gaza. That's not something that Israel is willing to do.
I'll never forget talking to the Israeli soldiers up in Metula on the northern border, and we had our Bibles with us, and I remember reading Psalm 91 to one of the soldiers.
Exactly.
So many great memories from that time, even though the Katyushas were flying. But it was war, and it still is. Chris, thank you so much.
Great to be with you,
Great to see you. Well, our CBN News Bureau Chief, Chris Mitchell, with us. And now, coming up here at home, historic wildfires burning through the L.A. area, forcing tens of thousands of people to evacuate. This is very, very serious. We'll bring you that story when we come back. Wildfires are burning out of control in Los Angeles County. Neighborhoods engulfed in flames and more than 30,000 people under orders to evacuate. A windstorm with gusts up to 100 miles an hour is feeding the fires. So far, firefighters are unable to contain the inferno. CBN's Gary Lane is on the story.
Hurricane-force winds are fueling fires that threaten thousands of homes in Southern California. 3 fires are racing across Los Angeles County, burning the equivalent of 5 football fields per minute, consuming thousands of acres and 0% contained. Overnight, firefighters battled the flames in the coastal town of Pacific Palisades. At least 13,000 structures are in danger. The fire moving into neighborhoods, consuming homes, a high school, and a theater. The weather is grounding the fire department's planes and helicopters, making it more difficult to fight the flames.
The fire is being fueled by a combination of strong winds and surrounding topography, which is making it extremely challenging for our personnel that are assigned to this incident.
With 30,000 people under mandatory evacuation orders, cars jammed the streets for hours. On the famed Sunset Boulevard, drivers left their vehicles and walked out.
We got in the car to go, and then all the cars were abandoned, so I had nowhere to go, so I just had to get out of my car and start walking. The smoke is so bad.
A bulldozer had to push the cars out of the way so fire trucks could get through. In the hills above Pasadena, 80-mile-an-hour wind gusts are fanning another fire.
Sounds like a train.
Staff at a senior care center in Altadena had to evacuate residents in wheelchairs and hospital beds, pushing them down the street to a parking lot where ambulances waited to take them to safety. The high winds are expected to ease off later today, but windy conditions will remain in coming days as the fires continue to burn out of control. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Thanks, Gary. We are praying for California. Still ahead, a surprising announcement from Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg getting a cautious thumbs up from many conservatives. We'll have that story for you right after this. Major changes are coming to social media giants Facebook and Instagram after the parent company, Meta, announced it's ditching its fact-checking program. As Charlene Aaron reports, conservatives are cautiously applauding the move as a win for free speech.
The shift comes after backlash over content moderation that began during the 2016 presidential election and continued through the COVID pandemic. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg admits fact-checkers showed political bias and undermined trust in the platform, especially in the U.S.
The bottom line is that after years of having our content moderation work focus primarily on removing content, it is time to focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our systems, and getting back to our roots about giving people voice.
In a bombshell admission last August, Zuckerberg told lawmakers that the Biden administration pressured him to censor COVID content on Facebook and Instagram. Brent Bozell, president of the Media Research Center, applauds the move, saying Zuckerberg demonstrated courage by acknowledging past mistakes and planning to make things better.
He was unequivocal in recognizing that they have been in the business of censorship, as we've been saying for years, and they've been denying for years. They were. He said they were going to get rid of third-party fact checkers, and that was the problem. The supposition was that by third party you meant independent. Well, it wasn't. It all came out of Silicon Valley. They were all left-wingers, and they were all devoted to shutting down conservatives.
Justin Giboney of the AND campaign points how his and other faith-based groups have also been harmed by the censorship policies.
For the AND campaign, for the last 2 years, we have not been able to do any ads or any advertising on any of those platforms, which was one of our main ways of advertising and promoting. Not only that, you could see that, even our followership and all that really just stopped at the time when this was enforced. And when they restricted us, there was no explanation.
Zuckerberg also admits the changes are in part a result of recent political events, including Donald Trump's re-election.
The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms.
Something Bozell says the new Trump administration should see as a major victory.
He has specifically put them on notice. This is just the beginning. I'm coming after you. There is a reason why they have all been paying their respects at Mar-a-Lago. There's a reason why they are all going to Speaker Mike Johnson's office, all pleading their cases about being impartial. Frankly, we've been showing both the president-elect and the speaker that it simply wasn't true.
Public Advocacy Director Aaron Turr of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression told CBN's Faith Nation these changes have an impact on political discourse.
The community notes model, for example, might have the effect of reducing polarization if people see it more as a legitimate form of counter speech. That is, we respond to speech that we disagree with more speech by trying to expose and rebut it, rather than having a few people with power at the top decide what's correct, what's incorrect, what's allowed to be said. Maybe that has the potential to sort of, again, increase trust in the platform and in the ability of people to express different views and try to have good faith disagreements.
Meanwhile, Giboney and others encourage a wait-and-see approach as to how new rules on the social media platforms will be carried out. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Coming up, remembering former President Jimmy Carter, our conversation with Christian recording artist and filmmaker Andrew Greer about Carter's Christian faith and more. We'll hear from him when we come back. As former President Jimmy Carter is laid to rest this week, we bring a look back at an interview CBN's Ephraim Graham did with Christian recording artist and filmmaker Andrew Greer. It's to reflect on Carter's Christian faith. Greer visited Carter's hometown of Plains, Georgia, to make a PBS documentary about race relations in the small southern town. It was titled Plain Spoken. Here's a look at their conversation.
President Carter has been an international influence, but some of his greatest influence, he and Mrs. Carter's, has been right here in Plains, Georgia.
You leading worship for President Jimmy Carter and his wife.
Yes.
What was that experience like?
Yeah, for the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, and Rosalind Carter, of course, the former First Lady. That's a project I've been working on. A documentary that he's a hero of mine, she's a hero of mine, the way they've lived their lives and the way they have implemented their Christian faith in their lives. In fact, I was able to interview him as well. You know this from having conversations with so many people. When they have lived that much life and then such an interesting or unique life in that they've lived a very international life and seen a lot of different things and experienced a lot of different things, it kind of makes you pause, right? With their answers carry a little more weight to them in a really good way. And so the last question I asked him, I said, you have lived all this life, had all these experiences. If you could leave the world with just one tidbit, what would that be? And he said that they would follow the way of Jesus. And I think, it's the process of believing. The journey of belief is not easy, it's not straightforward, it's not black and white, it doesn't just come to you. It's a process. And so I think there's a lot of affirmingness, a lot of affirmation, a lot of comfort in hearing someone who has been a part of so many different lives and lifestyles and faith backgrounds and people groups still come back to, I really do think this is the best way to live. Not even the best way to look forward. Not because I'm going to be in communion with God forever, but because I can be in communion with God now. This is the best way to be in communion with God now. This is the best way to know God, but also to see others.
There's some rich history in South Georgia, and there's some remnant of the past that is still haunting people.
At one point, they have a wonderful African-American pastor who's also had a lot of world experience, so he brings a lot to the table and fairly young. He's so dynamic, become a good friend, and he prays throughout the service, different prayers pointed in different ways. And he asked if I would sing a song I had written, actually originally at the beginning of the pandemic, I wrote it for my own church, just as a way to sing over them. It's a prayer. And so as I began to sing it, I saw President Carter take his hand. I mean, and he's feeble now. He really is coming to the end of his life, and wrap his arm around his wife of 75 years. And they just bowed their heads and began to pray. And I don't know, there's just something so sweet about observing people's posture of humility in their spirituality. That it's not all I get up there and tell people what to do, but it's laying it down again and again and again with these kind of open palms, you know.
Now, Mr. Jimmy talks a lot about how he grew up out in the country and the only neighbors he had were black people or African Americans. Well, I was the same way, but they were like my family, and I have a lot of black friends, and we'll say that we're sisters, but we have different mothers. So that pretty well makes the tourists go, okay.
Yeah. You mentioned the documentary. I know you interviewed the former president and Andrew Young as well.
Yeah.
What have you learned in this journey of a documentary on race and unity in our country?
Well, that there will always be something to learn. And so I think something I learned from Ambassador Andrew Young specifically is that civil rights never ends. You know, because of the brokenness of the world, control, manipulation, abuse, oppression, that will always find its way in somewhere. But what's been interesting, you can't eliminate. You cannot eliminate faith, and more specifically, Christianity, from the plight for freedom for anyone who is oppressed. God is speaking freedom at all times.
I say to you quite frankly that the time for racial discrimination is over. But we cannot underestimate the challenge of hundreds of minor decisions yet to be made.
Incredible. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of CBN Newswatch. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel anytime or online at cbnnews.com. Let us know what you think about the stories that you've seen today. You can email us. That's newswatch@cbn.com, or reach out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and X. We hope you'll join us next time. From all of us here at CBN, have a great day and God bless you.